Alright, my dudes. Next in line, what I got for you guys is a tips and tricks video. The little things I've learned along the way during my bait making, bait painting, all that good stuff. Not exactly as far as building baits goes, but we'll get into that at some point. But today is going to be more of painting and the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. So first thing we got is, instead of using airbrush cleaner, because if you've never bought airbrush cleaner, then I guess you wouldn't know, but airbrush cleaner is expensive. It's expensive to buy airbrush cleaner and to use it all the time, especially if you're doing a lot of baits, which I do. So what I've found is the best thing to use would be ammonia-free Windex. You get it. I get this at Giant, which is what we have in PA. I don't know what your guys' grocery store is in the state that you live in, but ammonia-free Windex. You don't want to use the ammonia or Windex with ammonia because it will eat the chrome out of your airbrush as well as all the seals, so don't use that. That stuff cleans it out well. I keep a bottle that I've already went through of the Windex that's empty with water in it, so I run the ammonia-free Windex through it, and then I go and run the water through it at that point, because to get the Windex out and whatnot and clean the brush out, good to go. So if there's one problem that I know everybody hates when airbrushing, it's the spatter, the spit that happens, and it just kind of makes everything look terrible if you get spit and spatter all over your bait or whatever you're painting for that matter with an airbrush. So what I found to work really good is Wyman's stainless steel cleaner and polish. I use it to wash my needle before I start, and then I use it to wipe during. Every, like, I don't know, I'd say 2 to 3 minutes I wipe my tip with it. And that kind of keeps everything from gumming up and keeps it spraying nice. Obviously you can still get tip dry here and there, but it does a fantastic job at keeping the tip dry and keeping you from getting spit and whatnot. Not keeping the tip dry, keeping the tip wet so you don't get tip dry, which is what we're trying to prevent. I use the Iwata Eclipse HPCS. I've used a lot of other airbrushes, Posh, all kinds of different stuff, and honestly nothing really compares in my brain to the Iwata HPCS. I think it works really well as far as everything. Detail, I use a 0.35 needle in it. When I have the Iwata Revolution as well. I kind of trash it though, spraying clear coat through it, which will be on this list as something that helps, but you want to have a disposable cheap airbrush to spray through that. But the Eclipse works well. I've never used an airbrush that works even close to the Iwata Eclipse HPCS. I use the 0.35 needle. I have used the 0.5 if you're trying to dump a lot of base coats on, say, like 40 baits at one time. You just want to lay paint, go with the 0.50. You can get it at Hobby Lobby or online. But I use the 0.35 for everything. The next thing on my list as far as tips and tricks, which I'm sure the majority of you use on a regular basis, but it's helped me a lot in the long run, would be the regulator and the moisture traps. I have one here in my line that I use on it stays on there. I don't ever take that off. And then I have one here on my bench. If you can see that, you probably cannot, but one here, and then I have another one coming right off of my compressor. So basically I have 3 moisture traps along the entire line. I also run a fan on my compressor if I'm painting more than one bait at a time, because it gets hot and that keeps it cool and keeps it from creating moisture. And then I also run a dehumidifier at all times. Why? Because I love my compressor. It does very well for what I need, but it does create moisture, and there's nothing worse than having moisture spit out your airbrush when you're trying to paint a bunch of baits. It ruins the baits basically. I mean, I've gotten good at cleaning it off, but I've also figured out that if I run a fan and a dehumidifier, I don't have to worry about all that crap. Alright, the next thing that I have found that helps me a whole lot is Badger Opaque Clear Coat. Now, I have to stress the opaque. Don't use a gloss. Don't use anything that will make it shiny and basically like it has epoxy on it, because at that point it will only mess up your bait and won't allow you to paint it properly. I've used other clear coats. Actually, for example, one is this one right here, which is the, I don't know if I can get it to focus, but it's the 4030 Balancing Clear Mix Additive from Createx Wicked Colors. It's a clear coat. But when I use this clear coat over top of paint, in between coats of paint, it makes everything separate and it doesn't adhere right. It's like a finishing clear coat, which obviously we all finish with epoxy, so there is no point to this. That's why I still have full bottles of it. But the Badger opaque clear coat is, so basically you're putting on a stencil. What I use it for actually mainly is putting on a stencil. I clamp my stencil down exactly how I want it, and then I do clear coat. I do 2 or 3 coats of clear coat on over top of this before I hit it with paint. Why? Because it builds up and basically creates a barrier and locks on the stencil, keeping from having underblow, because it's very tough. I'm sure anybody who airbrushes baits knows, especially with a more rounded bait, it's tough to keep from having underblow using a stencil. So I think that will be very helpful. I'm actually out of it right now. I ordered some, but accidentally ordered opaque, clear air opaque paint, opaque white basically. Not what I wanted to get. So the clear coat, try it out. I guarantee you it'll be helpful for you. The compressor that I'm using is the Zenny, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm not sure, I got it off Amazon. The Zenny Pro 1.5 horsepower airbrush compressor. It's $66.99 on Amazon. It works great, and the biggest thing that I enjoy about this compressor is it is a tank as well as the compressor. So the tank holds air and you don't ever have fluctuating air pressure. So if I want to spray at 20, it does not drop. I have other airbrush compressors that drop throughout while you're spraying if you're doing more than like 5 seconds of spraying. And then obviously you've reduced your paint to spray at the top at peak air pressure that you set your airbrush at, and once it starts dropping, it's going to spray differently. It's going to spatter, it's going to do all that crap. So this has a tank that holds more air in it, so during your spraying, your pressure never drops. It'll turn on once that tank hits a certain low point, so it can make sure that you maintain that pressure that you're looking for. Again, that was the Zenny, Z-E-N-Y Pro 1.5 horsepower air compressor, $66.99 on Amazon. Works great. Again, I have a lot of moisture in my house. Doesn't matter where you're at. Where in my paint room or my living room, there's a lot of moisture. I have to run dehumidifiers. So maybe you won't have to run a dehumidifier and a fan, but I do. But as far as the quality of the compressor, I've beat the crap out of it. Painted probably 800 baits with this compressor, and it just keeps on going and sprays consistently and nicely. Get out of my face, bug. Now, the last 2 things getting into talking about once the bait is finished. Once I hit this point, first thing is everybody sees my screws that I use in the ends. The screws don't stay in there. I could use stainless steel screws. I did at one point and just chop them off to put the tails on, but I don't like that. This is simply to put it on my drying wheel because I don't have $800 to buy clamps that clamp on the eyelets. I've made my own, but it always ends up building up epoxy and making it look like crap. So I use the screw. Why? Because after that I use the cork. Like I build a cork, I buy the wire off of Lure Parts online, .065 or whatever wire, and I bend the corkscrew to screw my tails onto instead of having to do all super glue. The super glue works fine, obviously. I've used super glue in the past on lots of my baits instead of using a corkscrew, but I've just since then figured out how to do it properly, and I use the corkscrew. The next thing would be you have a bait, finished bait like this. Obviously, I test my baits when they're weighted, sealed, and have the base coat of epoxy, either 1 and 2 base coats, and make sure they work. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't change the action once I get 3 more coats, or if something gets messed up, even maybe 4 finished coats of epoxy. So I need to make sure that the bait works. So I test them again. Obviously you need hooks. I can trim the freaking barbs off or whatever, which I've done. But the easiest thing I found is I test my baits, and then I have this Novus heavy scratch remover. It's a 3-part set. It comes with this one, 2 fine scratch remover, and then it also has a polish. And basically that's just so during the 3 casts that I'm casting the bait, or if you have them all in a box together, whatever, it gets a scratch, you don't want it, you can polish the scratch out. You just put some on the bait and it polishes out really nicely and really quickly. And then I always use a spray at the end, polish them up, and they look beautiful, they shine, and look great for the customer. Alright, and then my last tip on this quick list of tips and tricks would be how I clear out my eyelets at the end once I'm done with the bait. I tape off all my eyelets, yada yada yada, all y'all know that, but it still ends up with a lot of epoxy on them, build up and whatnot, usually completely through, so you can't even get through the hole. And I can use a drill bit, but I found that a drill bit can slip and can go directly into the bait, which is never fun when you drill into the bait. So what I found is either using a Phillips head drill bit. Works really nicely. It won't go completely through the screw eye, but it will clear it out so I can hit it on both sides, but also prevent from slipping and gouging my bait. Or I use a razor blade knife and I heat it up with my torch quick. It goes right through the epoxy nice and easy, and I can clean it out really well without having to worry about slipping with the drill bit and ruining all the hard work that I've already done for the bait. Alright, well, I hope all these tips and tricks were helpful for you guys. I know some of them are pretty simple and things you probably already do, but I figured I'd share the little things that I've figured out over the years of messing things up and ruining baits that I spent so much time on. If there's anything else y'all want to know about that I do, I know I kind of don't think about all the little things that used to cause me a whole lot of trouble. Let me know in the comments down below. But I do have the glider video coming out next, and then I'm gonna have some more videos. I'm gonna do how I do epoxy, because although epoxy seems pretty simple, you just mix it up and lay it on. It's not that simple. I've done probably 1,500 baits since I started doing baits, and I've used Envirotex, Amazing Clear Cast, all kinds of epoxies, and learned a lot of tips and tricks along the way that have made it easier for me and made my epoxy crystal clear. No bubbles whatsoever, just looking real great. So I plan on doing that. If there's any other videos y'all want to see, let me know. Thanks guys. Check out my fishing channel, check out my Instagram, my Facebook page, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks guys. Peace.